of my grandmother in very Western European looking clothing. And my grandfather, they brought two photographs with them from Poland. One was of my grandmother in this very beautiful European dress with jet jewelry, which now that I think of it, it may have been in mourning for her own mother. Okay, I don't think we have a photo of that one.
No.
But the picture that my grandfather had looked like a shot from outtakes of Fiddler on the Roof. They had very traditional looking peasant clothing on. So these two people came from very different worlds in Poland, but decided to make it together and emigrated to the United States. We figure it was about 1909, 1910. My grandmother said that they were in New York for a while. I don't know how long, but many of the immigrants coming from all over, the men were unable to find employment in New York City. So all of these women who probably had never worked literally outside the home while they were still in the old world were forced into working while they were in New York City. And they would take jobs. My grandmother worked in the garment industry. And when I think about it, it was really a miracle that she wasn't in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, because many Jewish women were working there at the time. She just missed it by a year or two. She told me that the married women were not able to get jobs, so all of the young women who came with new husbands had to lie about being married. And last night we were kind of hypothesizing about reasons for this. Pregnancy, of course, stability of labor force was an issue. And then we also thought that the men who ran the sweatshops also figured they probably had a better chance working with a more pliable and easily exploitable workforce if these women were not married. So my grandmother lied about her marital status and did work in the garment industry for a very short time. We think that at some time in New York she got pregnant with my father, and then they moved to Clinton, Indiana, where my father was born. We don't have a really clear time frame. At some point, my dad was born in Clinton, I think in 1911, yeah. And Elizabeth, it's interesting, in the booklet, they say she was born in Indiana, we don't know what city. But by the time the third child was born, they had already moved to Sullivan. The rest of the information I have is really quite sketchy. Becky had asked me to answer a couple of questions, which I'll just address very simply. One of the questions was why they came. And the story that my father told me when my own husband was agonizing over being drafted for Vietnam was that Harry, the reason he was leaving in the first place, was that Harry was trying to avoid being drafted into the Tsar's army. And so this was his original reason for leaving Poland. And then Sylvia to leave her stepmother. Becky also asked me if I knew who had sponsored them. And I didn't know this, but Becky said that she thinks that, from the tracking that she's done, that my grandfather was sponsored by a member of the Rosen family. Now, what's interesting is that this is that whole complicated bit, that it wasn't that Rosen family, but it was a Rosen family on my grandfather's side. So we seem to have Rosens all over the place, Roses and Rosens, and so we're not really sure at all who these other Rosens were. But from what Becky told me, one Rosen was a doctor, one Rosen was a dentist, one should have been an Indian chief, but he wasn't, and one was a shoemaker. And this is the business that my grandfather went in. So whether he had been a shoemaker in the old world and then was sponsored in the new world by somebody he knew, or he took this profession when he got here, we don't really know. But he did run a shoe store for his entire life in Chicago. Okay, the question, where did they go? Originally they lived in New York City, then they went on to Clinton, on to Sullivan, and then they were in Sullivan by at least 1916, and then on to Chicago. And I mentioned to a few people last night that the one thing, and there were a number of things that my father remembered about Sullivan. One of them was Eugene V. Debs coming through town. And another one was that my grandfather, Harry, had been at one point invited to join the Ku Klux Klan. We don't understand why. There's probably some deep reasons here, but I don't think he did. Having left Poland to avoid that kind of activity, I don't think he would have joined it in India. That may have been why he moved to Chicago.